This is House Planning Help, episode 201. Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and this is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-build, because I'm exploring what houses we should be building in the 21st century and trying to break down the major roadblocks that may get in our way. Coming up, it's my final episode of 2017, being recorded in the final hours, and with a festive cold, I'm reflecting on how I've changed over the last 200 episodes and how the podcast has changed with me. First, though, I wanted to tell you about a couple of Christmas presents I received. Presents are the least important part of Christmas, and you get to a certain age and you actually don't expect any presents at all. It's not about that. So I was quite surprised to get two fairly big presents and two fairly similar presents, one from my wife and one from my parents. Both being gadgets, of course, for the new home, and interestingly, both smart systems, which actually surprised me somewhat, because Kay and I, in the early stages of research, thought, do we want any smart systems? And actually concluded it's probably unnecessary. It's just something that we don't want at this stage. And I suppose this, as you're about to hear, might be another reason why smart systems can come down the line. Because is this smart systems by stealth? You think of the main market out there, it's people with Wi-Fi. So if you can somehow create a gadget that just uses the Wi-Fi, and as that gets quicker, then just doesn't matter. So I have been given a Sonos and an Amazon Echo. They've gone heavy on the advertising just before Christmas, clearly working. So both proprietary systems, actually fairly similar. You can hook them up to your phone. No doubt they've got microphones in. I know they don't, well, I can't see a camera, but it wouldn't surprise me if in future every single gadget seems to have a microphone or a camera on it. But you know what? I'm not going to be a fuddy-duddy guy. I'm just going to get on and use one of these things. I think I have to choose between them, though, because they are so similar. And as I mentioned, proprietary ones, so you don't want to use both. So I think we'll have to have a Christmas trade-in and decide which way to go. So as part of celebrating my 200th podcast, I wanted to create one more special episode. Because episode 200, if you've heard that, was 20 self-build tips learnt from 200 podcasts. 201 is me having a good old snoop and dig around in the archive to see if I can notice, am I that much wiser now? That is the idea. So it seemed like a fairly easy thing and fun thing to do at this time of year. What you discover is trawling through 200 podcasts takes quite a long time, actually. So I'll split it up into 50 episodes at a time, and we'll hear all 50 episodes. No, we'll just mainly hear me talking about who I've met or what I was doing at the time, or whether there's a very easy overriding theme. Perhaps it's an event I'm attending, and we'll just go through it like that. It's going to be quite an easy listening type episode. And as I don't imagine that you've been with me since day one, I think we need to hear how it all began in July 2012. Get ready for a cheesy intro.
Have you always wanted to build your dream home? Maybe you know what you want. But what if it could be better? HousePlanningHelp.com. Speaking to the experts, searching for better ways, planning for the future, build a better home. HousePlanningHelp.com podcast.
Hello, I'm Ben Adam Smith, and coming up I'm going to tell you how this podcast came about and my aims for it. Plus we have the first in a series of interviews with the experts. I'll be speaking to Simon Lewis, Managing Director of R.W. Armstrong, a very successful residential builder in South East England.
HousePlanningHelp.com.
So thank you for downloading this podcast. It is the first one, and I thought you probably would want to know a little bit more about me and what I'm trying to do here. So my background is not in construction, it's not in housing or anything like that. It's actually in the media, and I've been a radio presenter and also worked in TV for the last 15 years. But I wanted to be more in control of what I'm doing. And so I set up a production company, still doing much the same sort of work in video and audio. But then I thought, well, why not pursue another passion? And I've always had a love for buildings. I love looking at architecture. Whether we're talking about Machu Picchu, going up there when we were travelling was just, oh my goodness, how have they built this? It is incredible up in this location. And the Colosseum in Rome. I'm sure you've been to places like this and you know that there are certain buildings that you absolutely love. And then when I'm walking down the street, there might be buildings that I'm not so keen on. And so I thought, well, this would be really interesting because it is an aim in my life that I want to build my own house. Why don't I go and investigate all about it? certainly you can have a look on the internet.
That's how it all started 5.5 years ago. Can you believe it? And I went on to talk about being frustrated with the amount of building in my local area. I don't think that's changed, actually. It's amazing how it just seems to go on and on. Maybe a lot of it is to do with the fact that I'm not happy with what they are building. I don't think it's as good as it can be. However, back then, what was different was maybe my attitude. I was not very accepting of modern design, contemporary design. Definitely did not want any of that. Let's have a look at episodes 1 to 50, and this, for me, is quite easy to pick out the overriding theme, because I was researching what is an eco home. Are they all the same? No, they're different. What are the commonalities? What's the best practice? And I was going to do this for new build and renovation because I didn't really know what project I was going to pick out and how it would all work. So originally I said that I was going to educate myself by speaking to experts. However, quite early on in the podcast, I realised that I was missing out on a trick if I didn't interview self-builders as well. I think I conducted a survey and that was the outcome too. I thought, yeah, I must go with this. So even on episode 7, we had our first self-builder on the podcast. That's Tahir Sharif. And I got to see his home, which was nearing completion. So I think that was a really good move there, because that connected me with the people who are actually doing this. You can learn from the experts, but you also want to learn from people who are doing this, building their own homes. Maybe they have a slightly different outlook on things. In terms of people, well, I suppose I'm quite impressed that even in those early days, I managed to connect with some really key people. Episode 4, Wolfgang Feist, the co-founder of the Passive House Standard. That was a nice scoop. And then just it kept ticking over, didn't it? Episode 11, Brenda Boardman from the Environmental Change Institute at the University of Oxford. We had Mark Brinkley, the author of the House Builders Bible, in episode 19. Andy Simmons, chief executive of the AECB. Episode 20, episode 24, Jonathan Hines, director of Archetype, definitely a company that I really respect. L. Ron Burrell, who was working there at the time, but has carved out a little bit of a niche as a passive house expert. Lloyd Alter in episode 35 from Tree Hugger. Lloyd just always makes me laugh, and I think he's a great writer as well. If you've read some of his work, no doubt you agree. Episode 50, David Snell from Home Building and Renovating. I think we had Jason Orme on a little bit before. I haven't noted that one down. We'll link in some of these into the show notes. So just meeting this caliber of people who are clearly in the right area was very, very useful. And I think I got lucky too in those early days that episode 3, I interviewed Pat Wilkinson from Touchwood Homes, and he said, look, if you're really interested in sustainable building, go and check out the AECB. And I did that. I went to a conference. I think perhaps even through that, I got in touch with the Passive House Trust. And then a big moment really for my production company was when I was chatting with Tanisha, who was working for the Passive House Trust then, and she put me forward and said, look, I think Ben would make some really good inserts for our awards ceremony. And that started something which was going to continue for a number of years. So that was really, really good to work closely with the Passive House Trust, and then as a little perk, get to see a lot of those award-winning buildings. So what did I learn? Well, first thing, that I've come across a great community. These people so giving of their time, so passionate as well. It's not always straightforward. Sometimes there are tricky decisions that you have to make, and as we come later down the line, we'll find plenty more of those. For the house itself, I think the know-how is out there. It's hard to get it all right, but it's certainly not difficult to take a step in the right direction. Many a time we talked about things like scale, materials, passive house methodology. And I think that maybe that is the big learning from this, that eco buildings can deliver a very high level of comfort. And that is desirable. So you don't need to think about anything else. If that comfort is desirable, then maybe we might find ourselves using less energy just by going down that route. So that's quite exciting. I put together an ebook of my findings from the first year called Why Most People Don't Build Energy Efficient Homes. And a lot of that information I actually wrapped into our Eco Design 101 course. So if you haven't been through that, check out the fundamentals by going to houseplanninghelp.com/tips. That focus was very much on new build. Retrofit, on the other hand, is certainly trickier. And I remember this interview in particular hammering it home to me. It was my chat with Roger Hunt, the author of the Old House Eco Handbook.
To bring an old house up to Passive House standards is quite an invasive process. And like you, I've been to Passive House retrofits and I've seen what has been done. And it's been done very well, I have to say, in terms of making the building energy efficient. I think the problem is you actually lose the character and historic detail of the building. And those are the things actually that we buy old buildings for, because we love those features. To create a Passive House retrofit means losing a lot of the original fabric. And when you balance the carbon and all those sort of things, what you're stripping out to create a Passive House retrofit, I'm not sure it really adds up, because you're having to cut joists out of walls so that the joists don't penetrate into the walls, so you can create a complete seal basically round the inside of the building. So you're losing all those floors, you're losing internal walls and so on to create that. And so all that is going on the skip. I'm not convinced that that is the best way, not just from the carbon point of view, but also the loss of fabric. Historic fabric is hugely important. It's what makes an old building special. It's the reason that people go into a building with their estate agent and fall in love with it. It's all those quirks. It's the irregular lines and so on that make old buildings attractive to people. And some of those materials are really irreplaceable if you start pulling them out. So I'm not convinced about the Passive House approach in retrofit, but I do think you can do an awful lot to get quite close to Passive House if you really think about it.
That's Roger Hunt. And yeah, it was a good interview to remind me that not everyone agrees on the best way to retrofit, and I think that we all have to make up our own minds on that one. One thing that is easy to understand is for new builds, we just need to be building the best high-performance buildings that we can, because we have that opportunity when we start again from scratch. We don't have to force the building to do something that perhaps it wasn't designed for. So that's why I'm building to Passive House standard. Let's go back to what we were talking about, episode 1 to 50. Any other things to pick up on? Well, my commercial radio style intro disappeared in episode 20 to be replaced by almost a bold mission statement, a way of visualizing my future. This is how I opened up. This is the podcast for you if you're interested in self-building or renovating, as we discuss what houses we should be building in the 21st century. My personal goal is to be inside an energy-efficient home before I turn 40 in August 2016. You see, I was leaving the door open to, will I retrofit or will I build new? Well, let's say it that way and we'll see what happens. And I think largely to blame, yeah, it was Ted Stevens. Do you remember this piece of advice?
Spend 3 years building up your knowledge and understanding of what you're going to do and working out the exact plan and the spaces you want on the site, which hopefully you'll have bought by then. And really put 3 years hard graft into it, and then it'll be built in 6 to 9 months and nothing will go wrong. If you spend 3 months planning it, it might take 3 years and cost twice as much, So preparation is everything, knowledge is everything. So building up your understanding, and it means going to see lots of other self-build projects. It means going to all the exhibitions and reading the magazines and doing lots of research on the internet and picking the brains of people. The best people to get advice from is people who've done it. And don't be afraid to go to a building site which looks like it might be a self-build project and chat to the people on it, and ask them if you can show them around, and you'll get more knowledge from that than anything else.
And although it didn't quite work out for me, I still think it's a great piece of advice, all about the planning. That's why we call house planning help, because we know upfront planning, it will pay off, even if it doesn't work out exactly 3 years to 1 year or 9 months. Other things that I've noticed on listening back to these podcasts, I think I had a lot of time on my hands back then. No kids. you just have so much time. If you're thinking of having kids anytime soon, just enjoy all that time and the things that you can do. I attended lots of events like the ACB conference, UK Passive House conference, home building and renovating show, went on a cycle ride called Pedal House, going between energy efficient homes. That was good fun. Build It Live, I think that was at Blue Water sometime around here. Grand Designs Live. I was making the most of it. And one thing that surprised me in episode 4, I mentioned, there might be the possibility to film at a project, Jason and Lucy Reeves project, and possibly I could put together a membership website. Wow, that was early when I was thinking of in-depth video case studies if we fast forward a few years. So we'll come to that in good time. I think it's time to march on to episodes 50 to 100. And we'll start with, actually some quite important people I met and also some good friends. Episode 54, Mike and Lizzie, they built the autonomous house. And one of the things for me, my background's in media. And Mike, his background is in media too. He was an ITV News cameraman and we got on really well. So well that we thought about, let's make a documentary together. So he more or less directed that. We called it The Future of Housing and it was a Kickstarter project. And at one stage I was thinking, oh my goodness, we're not trying to get loads and loads of cash together, but this Kickstarter stuff is actually quite hard work, but we managed to make it happen just in the end. So we got through it, we got our funding, which was very good. And the focus was about air tightness, not to be done in isolation, but I think people know about insulation, that is one of the factors that can help improve energy efficiency, but air tightness, not so much. So we focused on that, but obviously we're really hinting towards if you're building new passive house standard might be the way to go because they think of a lot and they have it all together. I announced the premiere in episode 77. We went to a retrofit project, the Mildmay Community Centre. I was ideally looking for a new build, but that pretty much ticked the box and was a good size venue for maybe we had 70, 80 people. Really good evening. Pleased with how that went. Lots of help to make it happen the way it did. My wife Kay getting involved. She, as we go through these podcasts, gets involved more and more. She was behind some of the organisation there. Lizzie Stoodley as well. We've mentioned her from the Autonomous House, who was part of that. In episode 58, another interesting person I met, someone called Chris Parsons, who would later become on to be the firm that we'd hire, Parsons and Whitley, to design us a passive house. And the episode that we did with him was, does it cost more to build a passive house? Might be one to go back and listen to. Episode 74, another person who was pretty instrumental in getting the hub up and running, and that's Alex Baines, because he said, why don't you come and do the filming at Long Barrow, which is my project? And that was a Paragraph 55 build. We did an episode with him talking about the consultation that he did with the local community, just getting them all on board. Really interesting. His designs were interesting, and that is what we did. We got Mike and Lizzie going down there doing a lot of filming for the hub, and that was why when we got to episode 100, we were able to celebrate and launch the hub. Unfortunately, poor old Alex had to halt his project. The finances fell apart a little bit when he had to change jobs, so that was not so good for him, but hopefully he'll be back on track soon and we'll be back on track with the cameras as and when that's happening. I think it's sort of gearing up at the moment. I keep hoping that I'm going to bring you some news about that. During episodes 50 to 100, there was also a really nice international flavour going on. Some of it was, I went to Australia to visit my brother, so we had a couple of episodes out there, including one with Claire Parry, who I love. She was great in getting me in to show the documentary in a couple of different locations in Sydney and in Melbourne. Who else did we have? Jay Schaefer, instrumental in popularising the tiny house movement. Bjorn Koreyulf, I'm not quite sure where he's from, but I love some of the buildings he makes. Lots of straw bale buildings. Episode 91, Thomas O'Leary from the Passive House Academy. Then we had that great episode. I love these interviews with people that just have so much experience and are so happy and generous to reflect on it. Harold Orr, Cara Rosemare in episode 96. So some good stuff going on there. I was going to quite a few different conferences as well. Got out to the International Passive House Conference. I hope to return one day, but yeah, conferences have had to take a little bit of a backseat in recent times. Got to Gravenhill, where they were doing one of their taster days, looking at that as a possibility of somewhere to build, because they have a lot of plots that they were opening up. I got the opportunity to write for Passive House Plus magazine as well. It was nice of them to come to me and offer me that. Anything else to mention? Oh, yes. My first son, James, appeared on the scene. That, of course, changes everything. You look at your house and realise, oh my goodness, this is a small house. This will last for a little while, but that's going to be some extra impetus. And I think that this is where we come on to the overall theme for this section, because I was following Ted Stevens' lead of all my planning, but actually realising I need to get a move on now and find some land. So after 2 years, I started looking for land, only to realise, oh, this isn't very easy. So it was good, though, in a way that I did struggle to find land, because now when people say it's an issue, I can understand why, because I've been there and done it. So I wrote an article about why it's so hard to find land, and that actually seems to get a lot of traffic to it even to this day. So the land search went on, but the clock kept ticking. And let's have a listen to a clip from episode 97 in the summer of 2015.
At the beginning of the podcast, I say about my personal goal is to create an energy efficient home before I turn 40 in August 2016. And every time I say that, in my mind, perhaps there's a little voice saying, oh, you really should stop saying that. I wouldn't do, because you're never going to make it now. You've only got a year. And so I am feeling the pressure. I don't mind failing and not hitting that target if I've gone all out to do this, but I do find it very frustrating. And there are other pressures in my life that the current house that I'm in is too small. And I'm trying to use that pressure to force me somehow to get this. I know that we're not fully flexible because we do want to stay in a fairly small geographic area, which I know is limiting the choices that we have. We probably looked at about 10 to 15 different houses, plots, mixture of different things. We put in one offer so far, which we lost out on, and I wish we'd fought harder, because I know that we could have got that now, but it came fairly early on in the process and it looked like a plot. And I think that's part of the issue, that when something looks like a plot, then guess what? You've got lots of competition. Everyone or similar people are trying to get hold of it.
And you can check out more of my thoughts around that time 3 years in. The full episode online at houseplanninghelp.com/97. We'll have that in the show notes for you as well. And there have been times when I've thought, are my ancestors helping me? And this was one of them. Those on high. I inherited some money, and it was certainly a blessing, because I think building in Hertfordshire is just so expensive. With the finance I had available to begin with, I don't think it would have happened. But we'll hear again a little bit later how my ancestors helping me out again. Very, very weird. Let's move on to episodes 100 to 150. And the theme here, again, I think is quite an easy one to understand. And this time it's focus. Focus on my specific task at hand. I know that's selfish. However, I think it was the only way that I was going to achieve my goal. So episode 110, reflecting on my self-build project, I think that marked the biggest turning point, the biggest change in the podcast itself, when I decided to stop covering retrofit and also to focus on the UK only. So the retrofit side of things, I mentioned earlier how I felt that new build, it was something that I wanted to do first. Maybe down the line there will be a retrofit. However, it makes sense to understand how you build new first, because retrofit is more complicated. And so I wanted to decide I am going new build. That is what I'm going to do. And the focus on the UK, I love all the world podcasts. And I mentioned even in the last batch of 50 that I was really pleased with some of those interviews I was doing. However, that had to stop because I wasn't getting to enough of the detail that I needed to make my own project happen. So it was a fork in the roads. And I think I decided to do the right thing. UK only. It's not saying that one day we won't go back. I hope we do, or I hope we have some resources to be able to set up shop in other countries as well. For now, though, we're just sticking to that much more focused direction. Interestingly as well, I mentioned a few moments ago about writing for Passive House Plus magazine, but a few more things like that came along. I was asked to give a talk. One of them, Jackson Moulding from Ecomotive, was putting together a week-long series of talks and workshops on self-build and custom build, and he invited me down there. Then this was a funny one too. I got involved with the inquiry into the quality of new housing in England. I can't even remember how I did that. Anyway, I ended up on a panel of 3 different people, and that was just an incredible experience. Who knows if my great wisdom helped them at all. Episode 119, I bumped into Harvey Fremlin from the National Self-Build and Renovation Centre, and then that kicked off going to talk there really every 4 months or so. I love what they're doing down there, and I think it's such a nice place, and really good to see that the numbers of people heading down there seems to be increasing year on year. So yeah, lots of positive stuff. There was also the hub that I launched in episode 200. We changed things as we went along. We introduced progress calls where we could get the community together, a bit like a conference call. And I started looking around for a second case study, and was to bump into Jay Cottrell, who I'd met a couple of times before. She is the author of the Passive House Habit, but just such a nice person and really got her head screwed on well. Great morals too as well. So it's fantastic that she got me into one of her projects, and we saw the PH15 system, which I absolutely love. What else during this time of episodes 100 to 150? I think things could have taken a really bad turn for the worse if I'd taken one of these risks. If you remember, if you check out episode 146, I talk about putting in a bid on a piece of land where actually we were going way beyond our financial means, hoping to split up a mansion and take out the garden. I don't think it would have worked, and at the last minute we discovered that there was an overage on this piece of land that we were hoping to divide, so got lucky that that didn't happen. And also, I went through my 4 years. The 4 years, my goal. I wanted to build an energy efficient home before I turned 40. Well, guess what? It just wasn't going to happen. But the lesson here was that I didn't give up. Now, I think this final section will be slightly quicker because this is more or less up to date. But I did notice a few changes, and one of them, when your project gets going, then you're able to learn new things which allow you to create some more content and more interesting content. So I've loved all the episodes. I hope you have on my own project. Obviously, yes, we did find the piece of land. That was a monumentous episode 159. I'm so happy to tell you that, although it wasn't straightforward, everything that happened around there. So if you missed that episode, I would suggest that you go back. And also, we'll link in just the journey if you want to just pick out those episodes where I have moved on, selecting an architect, whether it's how the designs have put together, briefing the architect, going through that whole planning saga, selling the house. Was that a good time to sell the house? And then another big thing happening this particular time was my daughter arrived, Emily. So that was exciting, but it just makes things even tougher trying to develop a house. So 2017 has been an incredible year for making progress. Sometimes we've just felt quite on edge to even just get through this, but we have. So I think we've got to be very happy in what we've achieved, hopefully not missing out on her childhood too much. I think if anything, what's struggled this year has been my business, that I just haven't been able to give it the focus. It's been all about the hub and not much about the videos. I've just stripped that all back from Regen Media this year. But the hub, I would like to be my main business. I think in future it's heading that way as it gets more and more popular. So overall, I think it's important to point out that I may be behind my deadline. I am 5.5 years in so far, and we haven't built the house yet. However, we've prepared those foundations, and that will be kicking off as soon as we move into 2018. So it's an exciting time, and I hope to tell you a lot more about what's going on. I think over the last 5.5 years, I've also become much more accepting about plots. Perhaps, maybe if I went back for that plot journey, I might find something a lot quicker than I did the first time. I think it is that first time you just want something magical. And maybe that's the bit I hadn't told you when I mentioned my ancestors before, that the piece of land I found actually belonged to my ancestors about 100 years ago, maybe a little bit longer than that. Isn't that amazing? I do think there's something has happened there. Who knows? I'm not going to try and explain it, but that's just such a wonderful thing for me to have a connection to the piece of land, because to be totally honest, we were just chasing every possible piece of land we could. So to arrive back there was like coming back home, which is what we want for the house that we're going to build. Anything else to mention? Oh yeah, I was going to lead on to say that the design of house, contemporary design, the more you visit, I think the more you just understand why it's gone that way. And so I would love to build a contemporary house one day, whereas back in the day, on day one, I would not have considered that at all. But I just think that they function so well, and the lovely windows when it's done right, that you can see out of the windows. That's one thing that I don't like, windows with lots of mullions and transoms. I think I've grown to love windows that you can see through. It makes sense, doesn't it? And maybe one more thing to point out, that I'm far less accepting of new houses that choose to just comply with building regulations, minimum standards. I don't understand why you would do that. So have you enjoyed coming on this journey? I really hope you have. And we'll round it up in the show notes if you'd like to have a quick look through those. Perhaps one of the links that I've mentioned to you today, or the podcast episodes, has taken your fancy and you want to find a quick way to it. houseplanninghelp.com/201. Let's finish up with a look at the Hub in 2018. This is where I will continue to share a lot of detail about my own journey. We obviously have our in-depth video case study all about my house, so I'll be slotting that in piece by piece as we go through the year. But it's just going to be a great opportunity to build alongside me, get that fresh inspiration, even if you're in your early days, just to have a full look in at what's going on. So I'd encourage you, houseplanninghelp.com/join. It would just be absolutely great to have you in the Hub. If you're looking to build a house, then that's the place to be for 2018. Once again, houseplanninghelp.com/join. So next time, energy consultant and building services engineer Alan Clark is my guest. It's an episode about my own project, and we talk through the design and specification of the ventilation, heating, and hot and cold water systems. Hope you can make it for that one. Thanks for listening. The House Planning Help podcast is produced by Regen Media, content that matters.